Greetings, all of you fabulous Scrappy piano teachers out there. Welcome to the Scrappy Piano Teacher Podcast. My name is Jacqueline Rosick, but of course you can call me Jackie. And today I have a very special guest with me, Ashley Danyew, who I connected with on Instagram a few years ago. I've been following her stuff, listening to her podcast. She's great. She's fabulous. If you are not listening to her podcast, Field Notes on Music Teaching and Learning, then you are certainly missing out. So definitely get connected with that. Ashley is joining me today to talk about Informances in her piano studio. And she's been talking about this a lot in the past few years since she started it. And I think you guys are going to love it. Now, if you don't know Ashley, again, you are missing out, man. You are missing out. You gotta get on the Ashley Danyew train. She is a musician, educator, researcher, and a writer who thinks deeply about how musicians learn, teach, and build sustainable careers. She has a PhD in music education from the Eastman School of Music, and she has over 20 years of music teaching experience in community, studio, church, and college settings. Ashley manages a private studio of K through 12 students, and she has taught over 2,600 music teachers and directors through her online courses and workshops. She is the founder and editor of Musician & Company, equipping classical musicians with the tools and education they need to build sustainable portfolio careers. Here is our conversation. Hello, teachers, and welcome to the Scrappy Piano Teacher Podcast. My name is Jacqueline Rosick, but of course you can call me Jackie. And today I have with me one of my favorite piano teacher friends, Ashley Danyew. Ashley, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you today because I want to talk about a few things, but mainly we're going to talk about the Informance performances that you do in your studios. But before we do that, I would love it if you could just give us a little background on you, on what you do, what you're up to, your podcast, all that good stuff.
Sure. Well, I'm Ashley Danyew. I live in Rochester, New York. I'm a musician, an educator, a writer, a researcher. I wear many hats. And you may know me from my blog, ashleydanyew.com, or my podcast, Field Notes on Music Teaching and Learning, or Musician & Company, which I started a few years ago to help musicians, mostly in the classical space, piano teachers and beyond, learn how to build portfolio careers and music careers that are sustainable for the long term. And I manage a private studio here in Rochester at a private school. This year I'm teaching kindergarten to 11th grade, so I teach the whole range. And I have 17 students right now in my studio. This has been a great environment for us to cultivate these musical informances over the past couple of years. So I started them in my studio back in 2024. That was the year of the total solar eclipse. So I thought that would be a fun theme to do some kind of a performance event around, but I didn't want to do another recital. We always do our recital at the end of the school year, and it's just the one performance opportunity for the whole year. So I was trying to come up with a way for students to have some other way to share their music in a somewhat organized fashion that I could facilitate for them. So the middle school teachers had this practice of doing informances at the school where I teach. And I thought maybe we could adopt that model and kind of modify it a little bit for a piano studio. And so I started thinking about what that could look like. And it just kind of developed organically that first year as we were pulling together repertoire that all had something to do with the solar eclipse or outer space. Then I was kind of just documenting the process and thinking, how can we invite parents and audience members into this? How can we kind of take them behind the scenes and show them what we're doing and show them what the students are learning? And the students can be the ones to present that and share that information instead of me just talking on their behalf. And so it's kind of grown from there.
Just evolved from there. Okay, so this whole informants thing, as you're talking and you're saying that the school does it, I'm thinking to myself, this is adopted in other forms other than the piano teaching world. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
It actually goes all the way back to the 60s. There was a group called Affiliate Artists that was an arts management group that they were kind of placing musicians, emerging musicians, new graduates into different communities and facilitating community-based residencies, basically. They could be like 1 or 2 day, or they could be several weeks or even several months at a time. But the idea was to plug musicians into different communities and create these more informal and informational performances where they were engaging the audience and talking to them about the music and kind of breaking down that wall of performer and audience.
Okay.
So that was happening all the way back in the 60s. At the same time, elementary music educators were using this term to describe what they were doing for like parent-teacher associations. They would do these informal demonstrations of here's what the students are learning this month or, this term. And they were also calling those informances.
I have seen these kind of things. I've never heard it with that term, but that term is rather genius, whoever came up with that in Informance. But I love that. Okay, so you decided that you were going to do a theme, and I didn't realize this. This makes it even better. So it's not that they just had a bunch of pieces and they were talking specifically about their pieces, which I guess you could do, but you were really centering it around this theme. So let's talk specifically about what a musical informance is. And you already kind of touched on that, but I just want to define it a little bit more in detail. It's where, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is my perception, a student has a piece, it is a performance, but they're doing a little bit of research and then they are giving a presentation to the parents and the audience, correct?
Yeah. So I tend to lean into that word presentation a little bit more than performance. The first year I was pretty explicit when I was introducing this concept to parents and audience members and saying that, the pieces you hear today may not be performance ready, like polished to the standard that you might be used to in a recital or more traditional performance environment, because the goal here is to share the process and to talk about what the students are learning through this. And so, yes, they have been working on these pieces for however many weeks and they are prepared to play them for you today. But the level of playing, is not quite performance standard as we might have it for our end of year recital. And that's okay. The goal is to kind of unpack it, to take you inside the piece, to talk about the interpretation and things like that. So the standard is maybe a little bit lower. For these, they're a little bit more casual and informal. And we have a smaller group of people. So I divide my studio up into, last year I did 3 informances. This year I was able to do 2 because we did duets. So the students were combined.
Oh, fun.
So 6 usually per program. So that gives us like 45 minutes with all the talking and presenting and sharing. And we do some activities. We find ways to connect the audience, come up and try this at the piano or come look inside and see what happens when I put the pedal down, those kinds of things. So it's interactive. And having a small group of parents and friends that are there helps that be the case. So it feels a little bit more intimate and they can feel a little bit more connected.
Okay. This is really exciting. I want to talk about the informants itself, but then I would love to go backwards into the preparation on your end and with the students. So during the actual performance, about how much time do you have each student present their presentation or their activities and their piece?
Yeah, total, it's maybe like 6 to 7 minutes.
Okay, that's not bad.
So it might be like 5 minutes of presenting and talking about, and it depends on the piece and the student. And sometimes I'll give them an opportunity to say, what would you like to tell the audience about this piece? What would you like to share? And we practice this ahead of time, so it's not just in the moment. But I kind of structure it with an interview model. So I'm documenting the process as they're learning the piece. Like, this is really interesting that the composer did this in this piece. That would be something to talk about with the audience when we get to the informants. Or the way that you're having to practice this new practice strategy that we're using here, that would be cool to share with the audience. Or a new technique that they're developing as part of the piece, or, an interpretation choice that they have to make at some point. All those things, depends on so much on the repertoire and also on the student and where they are. So as we're going through the process weeks before the informants, I'm making notes as those things come up, so that then I can ask really specific, tailored questions to each student to kind of guide the conversation. And that also gives us a framework for practicing this ahead of time. So we, 2-3 weeks ahead of the informants are practicing in our lessons. Okay, pretend there's the audience over there and I'm going to invite you to come stand up next to me. And I'm going to start with this question, tell us about the composer. What do you know about them? Or what do you think this piece, the title of this piece means? And how does that come out in the way that the music is constructed? Or tell us about the form. Is there a particular pattern that you want the audience to listen for? Sometimes we'll teach the audience a pattern, a rhythm that comes back, things like that. Or we'll ask them, can you count how many times you hear this in the piece as you hear it played? And things like that. So that's kind of how we structure that conversation. And so the total, it's 3-4 questions per student, maybe 5 minutes of talking and demonstrating, and then they play the piece as a final component. Maybe then there's an opportunity to turn to the audience and say, did you hear, whatever, and kind of close the loop on that, or ask, did you have any comments or feedback on, what you thought of the piece after knowing the backstory of it, kind of thing.
Okay, so in the performance itself, are you asking these questions to the students?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, and you stray away from the word performance, and I'm probably going to use that a lot. But I do understand why you don't use it. But during that time, you're asking the student the questions and you're almost co-presenting with them.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
Which really helps, especially the shy students who are very, insecure about, I don't want to talk to the audience.
Right?
Like, I don't like to talk in front of people, because they're up there doing it with me. It gives us a way to practice that ahead of time in the lesson. So my students actually describe Informances as, this is like our lessons, or this is like a studio class, but we have an audience here. So it's kind of just like, you're part of, this is what we do. This is what we do in lessons. These are the kinds of conversations that we have, and you're just part of it. So in a way, it gives parents a window into what their students know, what their children know, and really understand, and the depth of learning that's taking place. Because they might hear their child practicing their piece at home, so they're familiar with the repertoire and the music that they're learning, but they don't know the depth of what that child really understands about that piece, because they're not asking those questions or having those conversations. So it gives them a window into that line of thinking, I think.
Well, I like that too, especially with you being in a school. Do you get to speak with the parents directly one-on-one, or is it more just through email?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of parents I never see, because I'm picking up the child from their classroom, and then I bring them back to extended day, and they get picked up. And so I never see the parent. Maybe a few times per semester, I might actually have a face-to-face with them. But most of the time, it's just email communication.
I love this, because I was just thinking, even in my studio where I see the parents all the time, it is a little bit tougher when I have more of a partner lesson or I have small groups for my super littles, because you just don't have the time to really talk one-on-one that you would like to. So even just for that, I think would help parents seeing the value of your studio, of your lessons, what the students are really learning. From the business perspective, I'm thinking that should help retention right there, because they're like, oh, wow, look at how much my kids sound so smart, What are they learning? What is this big word? I think this is pretty genius in what you're doing. And I also think it's so important for students as they learn how to share their music, performing, whether it is a very formal, recital or whatever, to know how to speak to their audience.
Yeah, I think I want them to be able to articulate their thought process around that. I want them to be able to talk about their interpretation, to own that. So this opportunity gives them agency, gives them ownership in the process. And I think it's empowering them to be musical leaders and teachers and innovators, and be able to develop those leadership skills that are so important. And parents have commented on that I can tell that they're learning so much more than just how to play the notes, because of what they're able to communicate and express. But just learning how to talk about music, whether it's in studio class with a group of 4 students and just they're talking to their peers and to me, or whether they're having that conversation in front of their parents and a few other friends and family, it's the same kind of thing.
And it sounds like they're taking ownership too, because it's not just you saying, okay, I want you to go home and I want you to do this and set the metronome at this and blah, 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 blah. Like, they're understanding the whys and the hows and how to approach this. I feel like there's so many different advantages to this, because they're going to learn how to be so much more independent with their own practice. We're giving them tools for their tool belt to be musicians for the rest of their lives. And I feel like what you're doing is you're adding so many more of those little tools, like the little file and all the little things to really fine tune their learning and their experience.
Yeah, a lot of it comes back to their individuality and their interpretation and their ability to express that musically, and then to be able to talk about why they're playing it that way. So one example from this year's Informance was the Japanese folk song Sakura, the cherry blossoms, and Faber has it in level 3A at the beginning of the level 3A method book, but they have a duet part available online, which I just discovered this
Oh,
year. So I gave it to two of my fourth grade students who have been taking for a couple of years, and they, in preparing it, obviously we have to learn about who has the accompaniment, who has the melody and balance and breath, and who's going to set the tempo, who's going to do the pedal. There's all these negotiations that have to happen. But in learning about the history of cherry blossoms in Japan and what sakura represent for their culture, we were talking about how the music has this kind of sad quality to it, the way that the shape of the melody and some of the patterns have kind of a haunting quality to it, but it doesn't sound like, oh, cherry blossoms and spring
yeah.
and everything's happy and joyful. There's a sadness or darkness to it. And
It's
so
like
when
a
we did some research
haunting
on that,
sound. Yeah.
yeah. Well, when we did some research on it, we realized and we learned that in Japanese culture, the cherry blossoms represent the fragility of life. They're a symbol of
Oh.
how life is fleeting, and the cherry blossoms are here today and gone tomorrow. And there's a seriousness about that. And so we were able to have that conversation and share that with the audience, and ask if anybody heard that in the introduction. Here's an example of, where we think this comes in the music, and what does this make you feel, and those sorts of things.
Oh my goodness, you just made it so much more interesting for the audience too. You're teaching everybody how to listen to music because there is a skill to that. There is a skill to go to a performance, to go to the symphony and to listen.
Yeah.
And this is what you're doing. You're drawing them in. Okay, let's talk about the preparation process. How far in advance do you begin preparing? How do you select pieces? Are they working on other things? I mean, I need to know all the things, all of it,
Tell me everything.
everything.
Well, I start planning Informances 10 to 12 weeks out. So I've found in my studio and with the school year as it is, that starting in January or even like over winter break a little bit, I have my theme picked before that, but I'm like really deep into repertoire planning, so that when students come back in January, here are your repertoire assignments or your choices. Like, I have, two pieces that I think could work for you that you might enjoy. Do you have a favorite? And I'll play both and let them choose from that. So we start at that point in January, and then that takes us into like mid to late March for Informance dates. So that ends up falling right
Oh, okay.
before spring break. February break comes in the middle of that, which is okay. And then it kind of also tiptoes around middle school musical and the other things that happen at the school. So it seems to be kind of this sweet spot window in the schedule. And that gives us a good, 10 to 12 weeks of working on it in lessons and preparing what we want to share with the audience. So we do spend a little bit more time talking about the interpretation and the musical decision making. And I'm, like I said, documenting the process as we go. And as I find myself asking interesting questions in the lesson, I'll write those down. Like, this would be an interesting question to ask and do in the Informants and share that publicly. One thing that I should mention about Informances is the goal is to create kind of an integrated experience where the audience is part of the experience. They get to participate in some way. So they're not just a passive, sit there and listen to us tell you about the piece and then listen to us play the piece. The goal is to invite them in, to have them dialogue and ask questions or come up and try something or offer an opinion or vote for. I had a student one year, compose her own ending to a piece because she didn't like the one that was there. And instead of saying, no, you can't do that, you have to play it as written, I said, this is great. I love your creativity. Why don't we present both endings to the audience and have them vote for which one they want to hear when you play it in the Informants? And that was fun. Sometimes we've had the audience come up and, let's improvise on black keys because this piece is a pentatonic piece and it's made with all black keys. And here, anyone can do this. Come up and try. Or the student learned a glissando, come up and try what that is. So we try to find activities that can connect them and give them a way to participate in the musical experience too, and not just
Wow.
be passive listeners. So we're making notes about that if there's kind of a natural opportunity within the piece. So another example from this year, there's a piece called Patchwork Polka. It's a piece in Penelope Roskell's Essential Piano Technique. And I forget if it's in book 2 or book 3, but it was a great level for my 4th grade students. And I have so many 4th graders this year that I decided to give it to all of them. It was 7 students, but obviously we can't have 7 students at one piano. So I had on one Informance a group of 4 and on one Informance a group of 3. And they took turns, rotating in and out with my accompaniment going. And we made it into, kind of a quartet sort of. So the idea is that there's like 8 lines of music and there's 3 themes, I think, and they are transposed to different pentascale patterns, and the technique changes. Some of them are smooth and connected and some are staccato and bouncy. So students would come in and, play like 2 students on the upper register in octaves with each other and then swap out, and then the next 2 would come in. And the whole thing was a polka style. So patchwork because it's all these themes and styles kind of woven together, but it gave us so much opportunity to talk about. I had, this student talked about the history of the polka and where it developed and, what it was used for functionally within society. And then this student talked about the word polka and where that comes from, what it means in Czech. And this student talked about the polka dance step. And we invited the audience to stand up and learn this little polka step so you can feel what it would feel like to dance a polka, And then they all did a little square artwork like design, and we pieced it together into a patchwork. So they did their designs based on lines in the music and what they thought how they could represent that visually. So they made their own patchwork to then display and show the audience as well. So there was great repertoire for that. Inclusivity and unity and all kinds of themes that we could pull out and talk about what the polka represents. So that was a really cool example. So we do all of that in the weeks leading up to the Informance. We're kind of developing what this is going to look like and who's going to share what and how we're going to talk about these things and how we can have the audience kind of experience that in some way as well.
That's so creative. As you're talking, I'm kind of thinking to myself, like, I don't know if I could think of all these fun things that you're talking about. So I'm wondering if there's other teachers out there who are like, oh, that sounds so fun. I don't know if I could do that. What would you say to that? And you said that you have a handout that we're going to include in the show notes, which I'm so excited to see. I mean, do you kind of have a little bit of a checklist in your mind or something written down that is helping you kind of come up with these creative moments, or is it the kids coming up with these moments?
I think it just a lot of times comes organically through the repertoire. And just taking time to sit with the repertoire and just study it. We have this, long kind of runway, so to speak. I mean, it's about the same amount of time I would spend preparing recital pieces, honestly, but maybe even a little bit less. But they're only working on 1 piece for the Informants, and recital pieces are 2 per student. So they have more time to just sit with the piece and think about it. And yeah, these things a lot of times just come up in lessons as we're kind of deciding, so why does this ending go that way and this one go that way? Like, what do you think the composer was thinking? What does that have to do with the title? Or, how do you want this to be different than that when we come back to the A section? What's changed? Or highlighting all the different contrasts that are in the B section, and what does that represent? Like character changes and kind of unpacking that. There's a storytelling element in a lot of pieces, even if they don't have programmatic titles. What is the character of this opening? Is it bold and confident, or is it more reserved and more inward? Is it outward or inward? So just I think thinking through those things and just like trying things on, like how does it feel if we interpret it this way, and which way do you like better? And just asking those kinds of questions and then letting it I've noticed the last couple of years now doing this in my studio that the students do have a more well-rounded interpretation of their Informance pieces than maybe we do for recital pieces, because we spend this time
I don't doubt
looking at it from all these different angles and trying to unpack it.
Right. It sounds like there's a curiosity about it. It's like approaching music in a curious manner and asking questions. And I can see how that would happen organically. I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine it would be a lot of fun to see how different students respond to your different questions. And I would think that the Informants would really pull out their personality
Hmm.
and the type of musician that they are. I mean, have you found that to be
Yeah.
true?
Yeah. I mean, some of them are such deep thinkers,
Yeah.
and sometimes I will write down their answers in the moment. So when I'll come up with a question in the moment that is just organic to my teaching, and they'll give me this thoughtful answer just on the spot in their lesson. And I'll think, wow, that was amazing. I want to write that down, how you just said that, because I think that would be really special to share with the audience. And they may not remember next week if I said, do you remember what you said last week? But like the sakura and the cherry blossoms, and how that a student had a very thoughtful reflection on how that related her part to the other part. And I just thought, wow, that's so profound. Like, I didn't tell her to say that or to think of it that way. It just comes from her own experience and her own musicianship. And so I do try to honor their individual voices and interpretations as much as possible. I'm not trying to shape it into something that it's not, or something that this is how I would play it or how I would think about it. So part of that is just giving them the space to develop their own ideas and to take ownership of that.
I love that so much. And okay, so let's talk about the shy student. When you're presenting this to students, have you ever had any who are like, no, I will not, that does not sound like something I want to do? I mean, how do you approach that?
We talk about it for weeks ahead of time, and we spend lesson time every week doing that. I think you asked a little while ago, are they working on other things? And yes, they're absolutely working on other things. It is not only about the informants. So they have their informants piece. They also have technique and warm-ups. They also have sight reading assignments. They also have other repertoire from their method book or whatever else they're using on the assignment. So it's one of, 4 pieces that they're supposed to be practicing all during that time. So we do work on it. I do, prep them on, these are the questions that I think would be good to ask in the informants and to share with the audience. And I'll kind of outline sometimes, like, here are some things you could say if they don't know. Here are some things you've told me in lessons. And I remind them of things that they've figured out or decisions that they've made about interpretation. And that way, I have some talking notes for them to kind of, so if they get stuck in the informants and they're like, I don't remember, I can say, so I think one week you told me you were thinking about it like this. Is that right? Can you tell me a little bit more about why you thought that? Or what does this make you think of? A video game or a movie, a character? It reminded you of something. Can you tell the audience about that? So I can kind of help them through it. But yeah, the first year I had, I think, a first grader who just gave me like smart aleck responses.
Oh, no.
In front of the audience. Yeah. I asked something about, so how did we were doing something with off staff notation, I think. And so I said, so your music up here doesn't look like what people might think of when they think of sheet music. This has like no notes on it. Like, tell us how did you make this? How did you, write this? And he said, with a pencil.
You're like, okay.
Can you tell me more?
Yeah. Well, I bet the audience got a little kick out of that.
Yes. Again, the personality shines through. So yeah. And I don't even think he meant to be a smart aleck about it. He was just not really in a talkative mood. Yeah.
Well, and I think it goes back to what you were saying about how you help them along. You're part of it with them. And I would think that would help them feel like they're not alone. And if you're going back to conversations that you've already had in lessons, then it probably feels very natural to them because this is what we do anyway. Yeah. All right. So I have just a few more questions about this because this is definitely something I really want to do. You mentioned recital. So do you do a recital later in addition to this in the spring?
We do at the end of the school year.
All right. So you have the recital. Do the students perform their informants piece for the recital? Is that one of the 2 that they do in their spring recital, or are they completely separate pieces?
No, completely separate pieces.
Okay.
Yeah. By the time that we've done the informants, they've been working on that piece then for 12 weeks. So that's, mid-March, late March, and our recital is not until early June. That's kind of a long time then to keep the piece and to then, continue practicing it, preparing it, performing it, etc. So we start fresh after informances, new repertoire.
Okay, so you have it spaced out a couple of months. All right, because I'm thinking, all right, my recitals are in April. But that's okay. I can still fit in an informants somewhere along the way.
You could absolutely repeat the repertoire too and have, we're presenting it behind the scenes as we're learning it and it's still kind of in development. And then here's the final performance product and the recital a month later. You could certainly do that.
Yeah. Well, and two, I'm thinking, I wonder if I could, have a few test subjects this year who want to try it in March, and we'll just see how it goes. So, speaking of that, as I'm talking through my own thought process of how I would put it in there, what other advice would you give to a teacher who wants to try an Informance for the first time?
I have found that a theme really helps. Now, I don't do themed recitals, and I know a lot of teachers do. So maybe you're already accustomed to this, but my students really love having a theme to work around, and everybody has a piece that ties in with this theme, and they want to know, like, so what's so and so doing? What's he doing this year that ties in with the theme? And it gives us a way to kind of tie all like six pieces together in a program, so that there's a thread that goes through. Last year we did women in music, and the students wrote letters to all the living composers and got letters back from everyone that we wrote to, and so they were able to share some insights into who this composer is and where they live and what they do and what they were thinking when they wrote this piece. They could actually ask the composer, so that was a really great activity, and everybody had repertoire by women composers. This year we did duets and ensemble music, so everybody was learning about accompanying skills and learning how to be in a musical partner and have independence that way, like breathing together and counting off and negotiating things. So having some kind of a theme, I think, is a helpful starting place. And again, just for creative planning purposes, it gives you a lot of direction then for where you want to go in terms of visuals or activities that tie in and things like that. Another piece of advice I would say is to look for an informal and intimate event space of some kind. So we do our informances, right? We do our informances in a classroom at the school, and we do our recital in a theater or auditorium kind of a space. So it's not as formal and it's not as big, and I would also say keep it small. So I've said like 6 performers per program. It's about 45 minutes in my experience, and that ends up being like 18 to attendees, give or take, depending on how big your families are and how many people come. But that is like a good size, I found, and keeps it manageable. So if you have a space, a library or a rehearsal space or a rec room kind of area, or at your home if you have space for that, a local university or school that might have, a rehearsal space or a classroom that would be big enough. All you need is one piano and, enough space for that many chairs. So that also helps kind of break down those performance expectations, because we're in a learning space, basically. And so it kind of that environment helps everyone kind of know what to expect.
Yeah. And I would think that would really help the student too, kind of not be as, when you're in those formal spaces, it's intimidating.
Yeah, we do it in the evening, during the week. So it's not like a Saturday or a Sunday. And that also helps. Students just wear their regular school clothes. There's no need to dress up or, wear anything special. And just kind of keep it organic. And this is just like my students have said, this is like our lessons, but with an audience. Or this is like studio class with an audience.
My gosh, you are selling it to me more and more and more, because I was initially picturing this as almost a recital replacement of sorts, which I guess it could be, but it's like in my brain, how I was picturing it when we first started talking has completely shifted. All the better. I mean, I was excited about it before, but now I'm like, well, shoot, I really have no excuse not to do this. Okay, well, Ashley, this is amazing. So you're going to have a handout for us that we're going to put in the show notes. And then you've done multiple episodes of this on your own podcast, correct?
I have, yeah. I tried to document my process, as I've been figuring it out. What does it look like in an independent studio setting, and based on our themes and repertoire choices that I've picked for, different years. So I've pulled together all of those episodes in one place in that handout for you if you want to go dig deeper into my planning process and kind of see how
I would say anybody who's planning or thinking about doing this should definitely, that's easy research. You're listening to a podcast now, just listen to more. And especially yours. I love your podcast. It's so full of, you really do your research with all your stuff. And I appreciate that. And then you also have an article in Piano Inspires for the summer edition, which is on Informances, correct?
It is, yeah. And it's based on a presentation that I gave at NCKP last year, 2025. But this is kind of an expanded article version for those of you who get Piano Magazine. I'm really grateful and excited to see it come out this summer.
That's exciting. Well, Ashley, thank you so much for joining me. It was so fun to talk to you again.
Thanks so much for having me. And if you do Informances next year, I'd love to hear how it goes and reach out with any questions at any time.
Yeah, we'll do like a follow-up podcast episode or something.
Fun.
Well, now I have to do it. Okay, you're holding me to it. It's going to happen. All right. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.